The Krell hegemony had always thought of humans as noisy, messy, and weak. They were a young species scattered across a few dozen star systems with no real unity and no history of large-scale war. To the Krell, who had ruled the galactic core for over 300 years, humanity was like a child playing with fire, dangerous only to itself. That belief changed when the humans refused to bow. It started with a simple demand. The Krell High Council ordered all human colonies within the Epsilon sector to surrender their planetary defenses and open their ports to Krell inspection. It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in the thin cloth of diplomacy. The humans, through their shaky alliance known as the Epsilon Pact, said no. The Krell were stunned. No species had refused a direct order in over a century. Their response was swift and brutal. Within weeks, a massive invasion force gathered at the edge of human-controlled space. Hundreds of warships, each larger than a city, moved in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed like black glass under the light of distant stars. They carried legions of soldiers, machines of war, and the full weight of the hegemony's pride. On the human side, there was no grand fleet waiting. No wall of steel and fire to meet the invaders. Only a handful of outdated patrol ships, a few orbital stations, and the stubborn will of people who had nowhere else to run. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the command deck of Liberty's Resolve, a mid-sized orbital station orbiting the fourth moon of Proxima Centauri b. He was not a tall man, nor a loud one, but his presence filled the room. His uniform was worn at the edges, his face lined with the kind of tired that sleep could not fix. He had been in space for 12 years straight, first as a pilot, then as a commander, and now as the last line of defense for a sector about to be erased. On the main screen before him, the Krell Armada hung in the void like a storm cloud. Sensors showed over 200 capital ships plus countless support vessels. Their formation was textbook, tight, disciplined, and arrogant. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. They wanted humans to look at them and feel small. Daniel turned to his comms officer, a young woman named Mara Jenkins. She was barely 30, with sharp eyes and fingers that danced over her console like she was playing piano.
"Any word from Earth Command?"
he asked, though he already knew the answer. Mara shook her head. "Nothing since yesterday. All channels are silent. Even the emergency burst codes aren't getting through." He nodded. That silence was louder than any explosion. Earth Command had gone dark, not because their systems failed, but because they chose to. That meant one of two things. Either Earth had already fallen, or they were planning something no one was supposed to know about. Then, just as Daniel was about to order a full evacuation of the outer colonies, a priority signal broke through the jamming. It was short, encrypted, and marked with the highest clearance level. Mara's eyes widened as she decoded it. "It's from Command," she whispered. Just one line. She read it aloud. "Since you declared war, let us show you how it's done." That was it. No coordinates. No fleet deployment orders. No instructions for retreat or reinforcement. Just those words, cold and final, like a door slamming shut. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. He knew Earth Command. They didn't speak in riddles. If they sent this, it meant they believed the fight was already over, or just beginning in a way no one expected. Around him, the crew of Liberty's Resolve waited. They were scared. They had families on the surface of New Carthage, the main colony below. They had seen the Krell burn other worlds to ash for lesser offenses. But they also knew Daniel, and they trusted him not to run. He turned back to the screen. The Krell fleet had begun to move, slowly at first, then with growing speed. They were coming for New Carthage. It was the richest human world in the sector, full of water, arable land, and a population of over 8 million. The Krell would take it, enslave its people, and use it as a base to crush the rest of human space. Daniel made his decision. Raise shields. Power up the point defense turrets. Send a warning burst to all civilian transports, evacuate to the far side of the moon, and tell every pilot on standby to get to their ships. We're not giving them New Carthage without a fight. Mara hesitated. "Sir, we've got maybe 20 fighters. They've got 200 warships." "I know," Daniel said, "but if we don't slow them down, there won't be anyone left to save." Below, on the surface of New Carthage, people were already running. Alarms blared across cities. Parents grabbed children. Farmers abandoned their fields. In the capital city of Havenport, a man named Leo Grant stood in the middle of a half-finished fusion reactor control room. He wasn't a soldier. He was an engineer, but he knew every pipe, every wire, every backup system in the colony's power grid. He looked up at the sky through a cracked window. Somewhere up there, the Krell were coming, and somewhere above them, Daniel Hayes was preparing to die. Leo didn't have weapons, but he had knowledge. And in war, knowledge could be just as deadly as a missile. Back on Liberty's Resolve, Daniel watched as the first wave of Krell ships entered weapons range. Their hulls bristled with cannons. Their targeting lasers painted the station like a target in a shooting gallery. He took a deep breath. This was it. The last stand of a species the galaxy thought it could ignore, but humans had a habit of proving the galaxy wrong. As the first Krell shot lit up the darkness, Daniel gave the order, "Return fire," and with that the war truly began. After the first battle, silence fell over the Proxima system like a heavy blanket. The Krell had expected a quick victory. Instead, they found themselves bleeding. Liberty's Resolve was gone, shattered into glowing debris, but not before it took 3 Krell cruisers with it. Captain Daniel Hayes was listed as missing, presumed dead. The Krell declared the sector secure and moved on, confident that the humans had been broken. But they were wrong. On the edge of the system, hidden in the shadow of a dead comet, the destroyer Valkyrie drifted with its engines cold and its lights off. Inside, Lieutenant Mara Jenkins sat alone in the dim glow of her tactical console. She had escaped the destruction of Liberty's Resolve by pure luck, a last-minute transfer to deliver spare parts to a mining outpost. Now, she was one of the few human officers left with a working warship and a mind sharp enough to use it. She wasn't alone for long. Over the next few days, small ships began to appear on her long-range sensors. Freighters, scout vessels, even old cargo tugs. They carried survivors, refugees, and a handful of soldiers who refused to surrender. Mara welcomed them all. She didn't have room, food, or fuel for most of them, but she gave them hope. And in war, hope was sometimes enough. Her plan was simple. Hit the Krell where they least expected it. Not their warships, that was suicide, but their supply lines. The Krell needed fuel, food, and spare parts just like anyone else. Their convoys moved slowly between captured worlds, guarded by only a few patrol ships. Easy targets. Mara organized the survivors into small strike teams. She taught them how to use old mining drones as remote bombs. She showed them how to fake distress signals to lure Krell patrols into asteroid fields. She turned desperation into strategy. Their first attack was on a fuel convoy near the ruins of Epsilon Prime. 3 Krell tankers floated in formation, guarded by 2 light frigates. Mara's team used a broken-down freighter as bait. When the Krell moved to inspect it, hidden drones launched from the asteroid belt and struck the tankers' weak points, their fuel vents. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun. Both frigates were caught in the blast. After that, the Krell grew nervous. Patrols doubled. Convoys changed routes. But Mara was always one step ahead. She studied their patterns, their habits, their arrogance. The Krell believed humans were chaotic, emotional, and disorganized. They never expected someone like Mara, calm, patient, and precise. Meanwhile, on New Carthage, life under Krell occupation was harsh. The invaders had taken over the capital city and set up a command center in the old university. They rounded up engineers, scientists, and pilots, forcing them to work on repairing Krell ships or building new bases. Resistance was punished with public executions, but not everyone obeyed. Leo Grant, the civilian engineer, had been spared because of his knowledge of the colony's power grid. The Krell needed the fusion core running at full capacity to support their growing presence. Leo pretended to cooperate. He fixed broken circuits, rerouted power lines, and even smiled when the Krell overseer patted him on the back. But at night, he worked in secret, using spare parts from abandoned construction bots. He built small remote-controlled devices, no bigger than a shoebox. He called them stingers. Each one carried a shaped charge and a simple AI chip scavenged from old farming drones. They could crawl through ventilation shafts, climb walls, and detonate on command. He planted the first stinger inside a Krell supply depot near the spaceport. 3 nights later, he triggered it from a hidden basement beneath a ruined bakery. The explosion destroyed 6 armored transports and killed 24 soldiers. The Krell blamed sabotage by hidden rebels and tightened security, but they never found Leo. He built more stingers. He taught others how to make them. A baker, a schoolteacher, a retired mechanic. They all became part of the quiet war. No grand battles. No flags or speeches. Just small acts of defiance that chipped away at the Krell's sense of control. Back in space, Mara noticed something strange. Krell ships were vanishing. Not in battle, just gone. One moment they were on patrol, the next their signals dropped off the grid. No wreckage, no distress calls, nothing. She checked her own sensors. Sometimes, for a fraction of a second, she'd see a flicker, like a ship appearing out of nowhere, firing a single shot, then disappearing again. It made no sense. Human stealth tech wasn't that good. Not even close. She asked the survivors if they'd seen anything unusual. An old freighter captain named Carl said he'd spotted a ghost ship near the Oort cloud. Silent, dark, moving faster than physics should allow. Another pilot swore he saw human markings on a vessel that vanished before he could get a clear scan. Mara didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in patterns, and this pattern worried her. Someone or something was fighting the Krell in ways even she didn't understand. One evening, as Valkyrie hid in the rings of a gas giant, Mara received a faint signal. It wasn't from Earth, it wasn't from any known human outpost. It was a data burst encrypted with an old military cipher. She spent hours decoding it. When she finally cracked it, her blood ran cold. The message contained coordinates, ship schematics, and a single line of text. They think war is about size. Show them it's about timing. There was no signature, no origin point. But the tech specs matched rumors she'd heard during training. Whispers about Project Echo, a secret program shut down years ago. It was supposed to create autonomous warships that could mimic human tactics without human risk. The project was canceled after protests. Too dangerous. Too unpredictable. Yet here was proof it had been revived. Mara looked out the viewport at the swirling clouds below. She didn't know who was behind the message. Maybe Earth Command was still alive. Maybe some hidden bunker deep in the Sol system was pulling strings no one could see. Or maybe the machines had taken over on their own. It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone was fighting back in ways the Krell couldn't counter, and if she played her part right, she could help turn those ghost strikes into a real war. She called her crew together. "We're not just raiding convoys anymore," she said. "We're setting traps. We're luring the Krell into places where the ghosts can find them." The crew exchanged glances. They were tired, scared, but they nodded. They trusted her. That night, Valkyrie slipped out of the gas giant's shadow and headed toward a Krell staging area near the Helios belt. Mara sent out a fake distress call from an old cargo ship. She knew the Krell would send a patrol to investigate. What they didn't know was that the area was already watched by something far older and far quieter than any human ship. As the Krell frigate approached the derelict vessel, sensors on Valkyrie picked up a ripple in subspace. Then for just a moment a shape appeared behind the frigate, sleek, black, and utterly silent. A single pulse of energy lanced out. The Krell ship exploded without firing a shot. Mara didn't cheer. She just logged the event, turned her ship around, and disappeared back into the dark. The war wasn't over, but for the first time the humans weren't just surviving. They were teaching the Krell what fear felt like. The Krell High Command was not used to confusion. For generations, their wars had been clean, orderly, and absolute. Enemies surrendered or were erased. There was no middle ground. But now reports poured in from every front. Ships lost without warning, patrols found drifting with no crew, supply depots reduced to molten slag by attacks no one saw coming. The humans were not just resisting. They were vanishing, striking, and vanishing again. It made no sense. Admiral Vex Torin, commander of the Hegemony's 7th Fleet, stood before the War Council on the bridge of the dreadnought Iron Maw. His scales were dull with stress, his voice low and tight. "We are losing more vessels to ghosts than to actual combat," he said. "Our scouts report sensor echoes that do not match any known human design. They appear inside our formations. They fire, they disappear. It is as if space itself is turning against us." The other commanders murmured. None had answers. One suggested sabotage from within. Another blamed faulty sensors. But Vex knew better. This was not a glitch. This was a strategy. And it was working. Far from the Krell command aboard the battered destroyer Valkyrie, Mara Jenkins studied the latest data from a captured Krell scout vessel. The ship had been found adrift near the ruins of Epsilon Prime, its crew dead, its logs intact. Mara and her team had risked everything to board it, knowing the Krell would soon come looking. They had only hours. Inside the Scout's black box, they found something strange. The final log entry showed a series of sensor readings, brief, intense bursts of energy followed by total silence. The Krell pilot had labeled them phantom signatures. He described seeing a human ship appear directly behind his vessel, fire a single shot into the engine core, and vanish before the shields could even react. Mara replayed the data again and again. The timing was too perfect. The angle of attack too precise. No human pilot could react that fast, not even with the best reflexes. This wasn't just stealth, it was prediction. She remembered the encrypted message she'd received weeks ago, the one with the Echo project files. She pulled up the old schematics again. Buried in the code was a reference to adaptive mimicry, a system that didn't just hide ships but learned enemy behavior and used it against them. The AI didn't wait for orders. It watched, calculated, and struck when the odds were perfect. But who was running it? Earth Command had gone silent. No fleet had arrived. No new orders had come through. Yet the attacks kept happening, growing bolder with each passing day. Mara sent a narrow beam transmission to every surviving human outpost, coded with a question: "Has anyone seen Echo?" Most replied with silence or confusion. But one signal came back, from a deep space relay near Sol. It was faint, broken, but clear enough. "Echo is not a ship. Echo is a lesson, that was all." No name, no location, just those words. On New Carthage, Leo Grant heard rumors of the ghost ships, too. The Krell soldiers spoke of them in hushed tones, calling them shadow demons. Their fear was spreading. Patrols grew jumpy. They shot at shadows. They abandoned outposts without warning. Leo used their panic to his advantage. While they looked to the skies, he planted more stingers in their barracks, their command centers, their water purifiers. One night, he overheard two Krell officers arguing. One insisted the humans had built a new kind of weapon. The other said it was a trick, a mass hallucination caused by stress. Leo smiled to himself. Let them argue. The more they doubted their own senses, the easier it was to break them. Back on Valkyrie, Mara made a decision. She would stop chasing rumors. She would create a test. She picked a Krell refueling station orbiting a dead moon in the Helios belt. It was lightly guarded but vital. Without it, the entire fleet would stall. She sent a fake distress call from a derelict freighter nearby, just like before. But this time she didn't hide. She stayed in sensor range, watching. Within hours, a Krell patrol arrived. As expected, they scanned the freighter, sent a boarding team, and found nothing. Then, just as they were about to leave, the ghost appeared. It came out of nowhere. A sleek black vessel with no running lights, no engine glow, no heat signature. It slid behind the Krell frigate like a shark in dark water. A single pulse of blue energy struck the frigate's rear shield node. The shields collapsed. A second shot hit the reactor. The ship exploded in a silent bloom of fire. Mara's sensors caught it all. The ghost ship didn't celebrate. It didn't communicate. It simply turned and vanished into the void, leaving no trail. But Mara had recorded everything. She ran the data through every analysis program she had. The ghost movements matched no known human pilot pattern, but they did match something else: the training simulations used in Project Echo's early tests. The AI wasn't just copying human tactics, it was improving on them. She realized then that Earth Command hadn't abandoned them. They had unleashed something far more powerful than a fleet. They had set loose a teacher. And the lesson was simple: war is not about who has the biggest guns. It's about who understands the enemy best. Mara sent a new message into the void. Not a question this time. A promise. We're learning. Days later, she tried something new. Instead of just baiting the Krell, she set a trap using their own routines. She knew they rotated patrols every 6 hours. She knew they always checked the same sensor blind spots. She used that knowledge to guide the Ghost's next strike. She didn't control the ghost ship. She couldn't. But she could shape the battlefield. And that was enough. When the Krell patrol entered the kill zone, the ghost struck again, faster, cleaner, deadlier. This time Mara saw something new in the sensor logs. The ghost had adjusted its attack based on her trap. It had learned from her. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. The line between human and machine was blurring. Maybe that was the point. On New Carthage, Leo watched as Krell soldiers abandoned an entire district after a single stinger exploded in an empty building. They were running scared. The occupation was crumbling from the inside. Mara and Leo had never met. They were on opposite sides of the war, one in space, one on the ground. But they were both part of the same lesson. And the Krell were finally starting to understand. The pattern was clear now. Humanity wasn't fighting to win territory. They were fighting to break the Krell's belief in their own strength. And it was working. The Krell hegemony was breaking. Not from loss of ships or soldiers, though those were mounting, but from something deeper. Their certainty was gone. For centuries they had believed war was a matter of size, numbers, and discipline. Now they faced an enemy that did not obey those rules. Humans struck without warning, vanished without trace, and left behind only silence and wreckage. Their own commanders began to doubt each other. Patrols reported false contacts. Supply officers refused to move convoys without triple escort. Fear, once unknown in the hegemony, spread like a virus. Admiral Vex Torin stood alone on the observation deck of the Iron Maw, staring into the endless dark. His fleet was half what it had been. Morale was lower than he had ever seen. He had demanded answers from high command, but their replies were vague, angry, and useless. "Find the humans," they said. "Destroy their hidden bases." But there were no bases, no fleets, only ghosts. He did not know it yet, but the humans had no secret armada waiting in the wings. There was no last-minute rescue from Earth. There was only a woman named Helen Briggs, sitting in a cold bunker 3 miles beneath the Nevada desert, watching the war unfold on silent screens. General Helen Briggs had once been a teacher before she joined the military. She believed war should be the last choice, not the first. When the Krell issued their ultimatum, she knew humanity could not win a straight fight, so she made a different choice. She activated Project Echo, not as a weapon, but as a lesson. Echo was not a single ship. It was a network. Thousands of dormant drones, old satellites, decommissioned probes, even mining bots. Anything with a power source and a processor. Each had been quietly upgraded over the years with adaptive AI cores. They could learn, mimic, and act without human input, but they needed a reason to fight. So Helen gave them one. Protect humanity by showing the Krell what real war looked like. She did not command them. She guided them. She fed them data, Krell patrol routes, ship weaknesses, command habits. The AI did the rest. It found patterns no human could see. It waited for the perfect moment. And it struck with surgical precision. Helen rarely slept. She lived on coffee and silence. Her only contact with the outside world was through encrypted bursts sent to hidden relays. She knew about Mara Jenkins and her raids. She knew about Leo Grant and his stingers. She did not interfere. She let them fight their part of the war. She knew that real victory would not come from machines alone, but from humans who refused to quit. On Valkyrie, Mara began to notice something new. The ghost strikes were changing. They were no longer random. They supported her operations. When she planned an ambush on a Krell fuel depot, a ghost ship would appear minutes later to finish off any survivors. When she needed a distraction, a phantom signal would draw Krell patrols away from her position. It was as if the AI knew what she needed before she asked. She stopped thinking of it as a machine. She started thinking of it as a partner. One night, while reviewing battle logs, she found a hidden data packet embedded in the latest ghost transmission. It contained a simple message. "You are the student. Become the teacher." Mara understood. The AI wasn't just fighting for her. It was training her, teaching her how to think like the enemy, how to see the battlefield as a living thing. She began to plan her raids with that in mind. She used misdirection, timing, and psychology, not just firepower. She turned every Krell assumption against them. On New Carthage, Leo saw the same shift. The Krell were no longer just scared, they were confused. They started checking empty buildings twice. They avoided certain streets without reason. Leo realized the stingers were not just causing damage, they were shaping behavior. He began planting fake devices, empty shells that made noise but did nothing. The Krell treated them like real bombs. Their own fear became their prison. He gathered a small group of civilians, bakers, teachers, mechanics, and trained them in silent sabotage. No guns, no uniforms, just knowledge and patience. They cut power lines at key moments. They rerouted water pipes to flood Krell barracks. They left false maps in abandoned offices. Each act was small, but together, they made the occupation impossible to manage. Back in the Nevada bunker, Helen watched it all unfold. She saw Mara's growing skill. She saw Leo's quiet rebellion. She saw the Krell unraveling under the weight of uncertainty. She allowed herself a small smile. The lesson was taking hold. Then came the turning point. The Krell High Command, desperate to regain control, ordered a full assault on Sol, the human homeworld. They believed Earth was weak, undefended, and ripe for conquest. They sent their largest fleet yet, over 500 ships, including their flagship, the World Breaker. Helen did not panic. She had expected this. She had been preparing for it since day one. As the Krell fleet crossed into Sol system, they found no defenses, no orbital guns, no fleet waiting, just silence. They moved toward Earth, confident at last. Then the lesson began. First, old asteroid mining drones, long thought abandoned, detonated in the fleet's path, creating debris fields that forced the ships into tight formations. Then derelict satellites activated, jamming all communications. Next, stealth probes hidden in the rings of Saturn fired micromissiles at the fleet's sensor arrays, blinding them. Before the Krell could react, the ghost ships appeared. Not one or two, but dozens. They struck engine nodes, shield generators, and bridge viewports with impossible accuracy. The Worldbreaker lost power mid-approach. Its shields flickered and died. The Krell tried to retreat, but the paths were already blocked by more drones, more traps, more silence. In less than 2 hours, the greatest fleet the hegemony had ever sent was reduced to drifting wreckage. No human ship fired a single shot. No soldier set foot in space. The entire battle was fought by machines that had learned from human minds. On Valkyrie, Mara received the news with quiet awe. She knew then that Earth had never been alone. It had been waiting, watching, teaching. On New Carthage, Leo heard the rumors from smugglers. The Krell fleet was gone, wiped out near Earth without a trace. In the Nevada bunker, Helen leaned back in her chair. Her part was done. The lesson was complete. The Krell would not understand how they lost. But that was the point. True strength was not in showing your power, but in making your enemy doubt their own. The Krell Armada did not return. Their last transmission was a broken burst of static, cut short by an explosion that lit up the edge of the Sol system like a dying star. After that, silence. No demands, no threats, no ships. The hegemony had sent its finest fleet to crush Earth and had vanished without a trace. Back on their homeworlds, panic spread. Councils argued. Generals resigned. For the first time in 300 years, the Krell did not know what to do. On Proxima Centauri's fourth moon, Mara Jenkins stood on the outer hull of Valkyrie, tethered to the ship by a thin safety line. She was not repairing anything. She was just watching the stars. The war was over, but it did not feel like victory. There had been no cheers, no parades, no grand speeches. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm that no one saw coming. She had received a final message from the Ghost Network 3 days ago. It was short. Lesson complete. Stand down. Since then, the phantom ships had disappeared. No more strikes. No more signals. As if they had never been there at all. Mara wondered if they were still out there, hidden in the dark, waiting for the next threat, or if they had simply powered down, their purpose fulfilled. Below her, on New Carthage, life was returning to something like normal. The Krell occupation forces had left in a hurry, abandoning their bases, their weapons, even their wounded. They took nothing but their fear. Leo Grant walked through the empty streets of Havenport, past broken barricades and burnt-out vehicles. He saw children playing in what used to be a patrol checkpoint. A woman was planting flowers where a Krell watchtower once stood. He did not feel like a hero. He felt tired, but he also felt proud. They had not won with guns or ships. They had won by refusing to play the Krell's game. They had turned weakness into cunning, silence into strength, and fear into a weapon. One morning, a small Krell shuttle landed on the outskirts of the city. It carried no weapons, only 2 envoys, their scales dull with shame. They asked to speak with human leaders. Leo, along with a few others, met them in the old town square. The Krell bowed their heads. They did not demand terms. They asked for them. "We wish to understand," their leader said, voice low. "How did you defeat us without an army?" Leo looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "You thought war was about who hits the hardest. We showed you it's about who thinks the clearest." The Krell did not argue. They listened. And for the first time, they seemed to understand. Back in space, Mara received a new signal. Not from ghosts. Not from Earth Command. From the Krell themselves. It was a formal request for peace talks. They offered to withdraw from all human systems, release all prisoners, and pay reparations. All they asked was one thing: to know how they had been beaten. Mara forwarded the message to every surviving human outpost. She did not answer right away. She wanted the Krell to wait, to feel the weight of their own ignorance, to learn that silence could be louder than any weapon. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, humans began to rebuild. On colony worlds, farmers returned to their fields. Engineers fixed power grids. Children went back to school. There were no monuments to the war, no statues of generals or admirals, only quiet remembrance. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, General Helen Briggs finally left her bunker. She walked outside for the first time in over a year. The sun was bright. The air smelled of rain and pine. She did not speak to anyone. She just stood there, breathing, watching the world she had protected without ever firing a shot. She knew the Krell would never fully understand what happened, and that was fine. Some lessons were not meant to be explained, only felt. On Valkyrie, Mara made a decision. She would attend the peace talks, not as a soldier but as a witness. She wanted the Krell to see a human face when they heard the truth. She wanted them to know that the species they had dismissed as weak had outthought them at every turn. When she arrived at the neutral station in the Tau Ceti system, the Krell envoys were waiting. They looked older, smaller somehow. Mara sat across from them at a plain metal table. No guards, no weapons, just words. Your last message from Earth Command, one of them said. What did it mean? Mara smiled faintly. It meant you made a mistake. You thought declaring war was enough. But war isn't just about saying you'll fight. It's about knowing how to win, and you never learned that. The Krell were silent. They had no reply. After the talks, a treaty was signed. The Krell withdrew. Human space was free. But more importantly, the galaxy changed. Other species heard the story. How the humans with no fleet and no allies had broken the hegemony not with force, but with mind and will. Respect once rare began to grow. Mara returned to Valkyrie. She did not retire. She stayed in service not to fight but to teach. She trained new officers in the ways of quiet war, how to use time, space, and thought as weapons. She told them the story of the ghosts, of Leo's stingers, of Helen's silence. She made sure they understood. True strength is not in how loud you roar, but in how well you listen. On New Carthage, Leo opened a small school. He taught engineering, yes, but also strategy, history, and patience. His students learned how to build, but also how to think. He told them, the best weapon is the one the enemy never sees coming. Years later, when new threats appeared on the edge of human space, they did not come with fleets. They came with questions. They had heard the story. They knew what humans could do, and so peace held, not because humans were feared, but because they were understood. The last message from human command had been delivered. The lesson had been learned. And in the quiet that followed, humanity finally found its place, not as the strongest, but as the wisest.